Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where we bridge the gap between academics and marketing. Every other week, we sit down and go deep behind some of America's most successful brands. I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shelton.
And today we're sitting with Adam Ferrier, author of 2 excellent books in the advertising arena, also founder of Thinkerbell, one of Australia's leading creative agencies, and the host of the podcast Black T-Shirts. Let's get into it.
Sure.
Yeah, Adam, welcome to Behavioral Science for Brands. As you know, Richard and I have been on this little mission to bring behavioral science to the world, specifically in marketing and advertising. We're so excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to be here. And may I say, congratulations on your new president.
Oh, thank you very much. It is what I have been telling everyone who will listen to me is it's a proud moment in America when we have a peaceful transition of power, and we've done it again. So we're excited about that, and the people have spoken. It's a serious one.
And may it not be a shit show.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. It's beautifully said. So, Adam, if you'll indulge me, I am going to give our listeners a little background on you, and then we can get into a conversation.
Cool.
I'm quoting your agency website when I say, Adam is one of Australia's most successful and best-known consumer psychologists. Okay, he may be the only one. Go ahead, please. Which in a sentence, Mr. Ferrier, encapsulates the humor and the seriousness with which you bring to your work. You are a serious thought leader in the world of consumer psychology, brand strategy, and behavioral economics. Your books, The Advertising Effect, How to Change Behavior and Stop Listening to the Customer, Try Hearing Your Brand Instead, have been on Richard and my bookshelves for a long time. And so for our listeners who may have not been able to read your books yet, we thought bringing you on to the show today, getting the chance to have a conversation and learning about all that you're doing at Thinkerbell and your podcast would be a great opportunity. So we're excited to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us. We always start with an opening question. Our listeners love stories. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got introduced to the world of advertising. What brought you to consumer psychology? How did you find yourself in this industry?
Cool. I'm happy to do that. Before I do, Artie, you have to go downstairs, buddy. I love you, mate. But downstairs, out for a little bit, mate. Love you.
How much you do?
Not long, but just... Yes, you can.
We have a little parenting interlude. Everything's good. Everything's good.
That's Artie. I have another one, Asterix, and a beautiful wife, Anna. The story of how I got into this is a little bit long, so just cut me off or say this is getting boring.
Not at all.
When I was at school, I used to have a uncle who was a stockbroker, and so I used to every lunchtime I'd run to the only landline in the school, and I'd ring up my stockbroker and trade shares all lunchtime. And then as soon as the lunch bell to go back to class came, I'd hang up and go back to class. And so I was always known as the weird, rich kind of guy who played the stock market. And as this was happening, my grades were plummeting as I was just kind of getting with shares and that kind of thing. And then I had to go see a tutor to help me get through school, basically. And the tutor said, what are your interests? And I said, money and people. And that tutor, when I was just starting year 12, which is our final year in Australia, said I should become a consumer psychologist. And as soon as he said that, I thought, oh my God, that's perfect. I had no idea what it was. I don't even think he knew. In fact, the profession doesn't actually exist in Australia. And that tutor has since gone to prison for various weird things. But he got my advice right, and I knew it instantly, and that story never happened. So I went and studied commerce and psychology at uni. I got sidetracked when I graduated into forensic psychology, so I spent a few years in the prison system as a psychologist, private practice, writing court reports and that kind of thing. I then read a book called Pause of the Court, The Something of Expert Testimony. And I thought, I don't want to be a whore of the court. And so I thought, well, I need to go back into that thing of consumer psychology that I was interested in. But how do I get back in there? I was studying my master's part-time, so I did my master's in the psychology on identifying the underlying constructs of cool people, what made people cool. And I thought, if I did that, that would be a very sellable thing. That would be important in the world of consumer psychology. Did that, got a job with a marketing consultancy, published my thesis, became a cool hunter for a while, and then got into basically became a psychologist. In Australia, the term consumer psychologist isn't registered. So once you're a registered psychologist, you can call yourself a pet psychologist, a fish psychologist, or whatever. So I'm calling myself a consumer psychologist. In the US and the UK, the term consumer psychologist is a legitimate thing. So I'm a legitimate psychologist. I'm an illegitimate consumer psychologist.
And one that has taken your illegitimate status and really continued to build on that underlying thesis of coolness throughout your career. I mean, as I've listened to you speak in different venues, as I've read things you've written, coolness may not always be at the forefront of what you're talking about, but what people's perception of what cool is, or why people feel the way they feel, and why we should think about that, has been at the center of a lot of your work. Would you say?
Yeah, I would. I reckon I think that whole thought of you are what you buy, and there's a saying, and there's a formula in consumer psychology which is actual self plus brand equals ideal self, and I like that concept, as evil as that may be, but what it misses out on as well is a little bit of that collective cultural experience we have with brands together. I think coolness is a bit corny, isn't it? It's a bit cliched, and the older and fatter I get, the weirder it is to talk about it. But it does have that sense of aspiration and also kind of popularity about it. And it's just bloody interesting. As soon as you say stuff about cool, everyone wants to talk about that. So it's hard to not talk about that.
Is it fair to say that you've taken that base, and when you talk about how you can apply creativity to brand building, you have a few core steps of what you should be thinking about when you're applying creativity to brand building? It's in the same range. Is that fair?
Nah, I wouldn't. I would say I use it as a sales tool or as an interest tool, but when it gets down to unpacking coolness and trying to apply that to brands, the whole thing kind of falls apart. But it's a pretty fat word. It's like saying you want to be popular or you want to be, it doesn't help get that far. I think what's been much more useful is being a psychologist. A psychologist once said to me many years ago that psychology just relabels what people already know and makes it digestible and understandable just by playing it back to them in language they get. And I kind of like that concept. And when I got into marketing, behavioral economics hadn't kind of made the inroads it's had. Marketing sciences hadn't made the inroads it had. So it was all completely made up and there was no common language. And so I've got a few early runs on the board by calling myself a psychologist, by unpacking what was already happening a bit in language that psychologists use. And it was kind of like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed person's king, right? So I had a bit of language and that kind of gave me a running start. Here we are.
Thanks for sharing that.
So that's fascinating background, Adam. On the podcast, one of the things we're super interested in is bridging the gap between the academic side of psychology and then the practical world of marketing. So are there any examples in marketing where you think a principle from psychology has been brilliantly applied by a brand? Is there any specific example that you want to share?
I mean, the hard thing about your question, Richard, is all the principles of psychology have been applied for years, and good marketing often uses those. They just didn't have a name for it. So back in the day, people were creating social norms by saying 9 out of 10 dentists prefer this. But now we're doing that with a little bit more, being a bit more deliberate about it. I think what's been quite interesting is in Australia and Europe, more than America, is the inroads the Ehrenberg Bass Institute has made into how we do marketing, and taking away a lot of the fluff and putting some. I'm going to use quotes here, although the Ehrenberg Bass Institute would kill me, putting some science into it, because we now know how people make decisions and what we need to do to help them buy one brand over the other. And we also know the power of advertising. We know that it's a weak force. We know that it's not that strong. Therefore, we know what we need to do to make it work harder. And I reckon that's been really interesting in how marketing is getting more effective and changing, and arguably creatively better. If I boiled it down, was overly reductive, and this is going to, again, upset the people at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, I'd say it all comes down to make the logo bigger, which used to be, what a bad client would say to their ad agency. When you look at the work at the moment from, two of the best agencies in the world, there's Uncommon, which is, you should get Niels Leonard on this as one of the founders of Uncommon. He's amazing. And the other agency I really admire is Rethink. And they're kind of they're a Canadian-based agency. They're quite stunty. But both of those agencies, so much of their work is just getting the brand or the business front and center, making sure the whole thing's completely branded, and then telling an evocative story from there. So, all the work that Rethink does with Heinz, you have a look at it. They always just use the bottle in some kind of interesting way. They make the label, put the label on 32 degrees, which is the ideal way. So when the bottle's being poured, the label's upright. So if the bottle's poured at 32 degrees, the label's upright. So that creates cognitive disfluency at shelf, so it stands out more. So Adam Adler's, or his work on cognitive disfluency, is kind of on display there. I'm sure the people at Rethink don't know who Adam is, or don't give a shit about cognitive disfluency. But that's a principle they've applied. But the people at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute will be stoked because the logo's front and center and the entire ad's branded. And then the people at Heinz are stoked because they're getting a product message out, which is, this sauce is so thick, you have to put the bottle at 32 degrees or whatever it is in order for it to work. And lots of their stuff is like that. Take Niels Leonard at Uncommon. Again, he couldn't give a shit about, they care about marketing sciences, but they're not. I don't know how much they're using it in their language. But take the British Airways work they've done, where there's, they're talking about stories and so forth and the emotion of every seat in the plane, and they're just doing massive close-ups of the side of a BA plane with a little face in the window. And that's the whole outdoor ad. So the whole thing has got emotion in it, but it's heavily, heavily branded, highly evocative, stands out.
Yeah, I love that example from Uncommon and the British Airways work. And the example that springs to mind when you talk about it, so Michael Aaron, you might have seen this in America, I don't know how heavy they might run over in the States, but it's the side of the plane, and rather than seeing British Airways on it, you see British Airways. And I think that's a lovely example of someone applying the generation effect, this idea from Graf and Slameka back at the University of Toronto, that if you allow people to kind of fill in the blanks themselves, to come up with the answer themselves, that processing they do embeds the message more deeply in their mind. If you just tell someone it's British Airways, that's one thing. If they work out from the ad what it is, then it's much more likely to be memorable. So I think there's a lovely example of a bias in there being used. But what's really interesting is the point you made about some people deliberately look at these insights from psychology, take that as an inspiration, and then generate creative ideas based on it. But I think you're also right that there is as many people who've never heard of these experiments, but they are intuitively great observers of human nature. And that's fantastic if you've got that very small group of people like that. But why I love behavioral science or psychology is it kind of systemizes it for the rest of us. Now, we can't all be Niels Leonard or Bill Bernbach.
I totally agree. That's a beautiful way to put it. And it stops the crap. Like, I think lots of people go to agencies and get really bad experiences of creativity because they just get completely uninformed creative solutions, and which normally manifests itself as 27 seconds of something funny followed by the brand
for 3 seconds.
Yeah, and then sales don't increase, and then they go, well, why? And then they talk about, oh, it's a slow burn, or you just have to wait, and the sales never increase, and they move on. So I do think marketing sciences, behavioral sciences, have stopped the crap, lifted the bar for everybody. And if you just followed the Ehrenberg Bass Institute's laws to the letter, I think what it does at the very least is average marketing done well. So I don't know how much room there is within the Ehrenberg Bass frameworks to create something incredibly charming or create something that's culturally going to sing, but you are going to do line and length marketing well.
Although I was going to say, because knowing about the principles you mentioned right at the beginning, social proof, this is an idea that marketers have known instinctively for a long time. This idea that if you make something appear popular, it becomes more appealing and people are more likely to buy it. Now, the basic way, the pedestrian way of doing that would be to say, we've sold 1 million cans of Heineken, or 9 out of 10 people recommend us. So they think that is about lifting the floor, as it were. But I think you could also see people taking social proof not as the endpoint, not just force fitting the idea onto their comms, but just seeing it as an input into the creative process.
Yeah.
So there's a lovely example, really old one. I think it's a 1986 ad from Ford. And it's Ford Escort, when that was the world's best-selling car. And the posters they run were these giant posters. And on them, they printed out in tiny, tiny font every single make and model of competitor car. And then over the top, they said, Ford Escort, if your car's on the list, we outsell it. Now, that's still social proof. But I think that's an example of where they haven't just stopped at a very basic application of idea. They've seen the role of behavioral science. It's just a hypothesis of human nature. They still had a job to do with it, to apply it with a bit of wit and flair. So I feel quite strongly that behavioral science can lead to amazing advertising, but not if you think it's the end point, as it were.
Yeah, there's a great concept called, which I really love, it's called embodied cognitions. So basically, our cognitions and our actions are interrelated. Stuff you guys will obviously already know. But if there's a nice little study done that showed, there's actually quite a lot of studies done on this, but if you show people, I'll draw a little example here. If you show people a soup, and that soup has got a spoon, there you go, coming out on the right, you'll reach for it with your hand in your head. Preference for that soup versus the soup spoon coming out from the other way goes up about 20%. So you go, oh, I like that, about 20% more increase because the soup spoon is related to how you would take it. Now, you're not going to do a whole campaign around putting the soup spoon on the right side, but just by knowing that stops you, that doesn't have to be the core of your idea, but put the soup spoon coming out of the right if you know that preference increases 20% because people are reaching for it in their head. You can't get there. You can either get there by knowing about embodied cognitions, being a nerd, or you can get there by just being incredibly intuitive as a creative person or whatever. But as you say, Richard, coming back to that point, it minimizes the chances of you knowing about.
Yeah, and it is a small tweak to a bit of photography in that example, but it's costless. Now you've got to, if you are doing a product shop and it's the cake or the soup is being eaten, the spoon's got to sit somewhere. You might as well place it in the way that is going to work with human nature rather than against it.
Yeah. The only caveat to that is sometimes if everyone knows that, then everyone puts the soup spoon on the right. Then maybe if you put the soup spoon coming in directly from the top and a hand holding it like that, then maybe creatively that's going to stand out more. But anyway.
No, it's well said that distinctiveness will go a long way if everybody in the category has the same convention. Adam, I wanted to ask you to go back because you introduced this very interesting idea that if you follow the Ehrenberg Bass Institute letters of the law and you followed everything exactly, you would get effective advertising, but maybe not emotionally connective or memorable advertising. Maybe you could talk about how you've seen using these base principles get you to good, and then what you've seen help get brands to great, or where you've seen that, being able to build on top of these strong foundations.
Michael Aaron, that is a such a good question, and one that I'm going to have to just play with an idea, right? Because I don't know what the answer is to that. If I knew what the answer is to that, I'd be blogging very aggressively. The way I look at it is every interaction I have with the brand has a half-life in my head. And that idea has a half-life and a decay that I don't really know about. If I just see a TV ad or a piece of video content, no matter how good that content is, the half-life will disappear after a while. So I need to keep on topping it up. So I need to keep on topping it up because you never know when I'm going to be in the category to buy something. And the whole name of the game is being in my head when the category trigger occurs. So if I follow Ehrenberg Bass letters to the law, I have to kind of keep on topping up my comms to be in the head when that happens. Where we don't have enough language or enough knowledge is if I have a really powerful experience and create an idea that sticks in my head for years and years and years, I might never need to advertise again because I'll be stuck in the head. A bit like branding. If you brand a cow with an iron, that cow's not going to forget about the iron, about that brand. But if you just tell the cow, they'll forget about it. Hang on one sec. I'll eat my little mate. Go downstairs. I'll be down shortly. Okay, mate. Promise. But don't come up again, okay? Or else I'll be at. Please don't come up again. I'll be down shortly. All right? Okay.
He loves being around you, Dad. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, this is best parenting. This is my performance parenting mode.
Yeah.
Believe me.
I see the restraint.
That would be quite a different interaction.
If you were being recorded. Yeah.
But let's be under no illusions here. I am a quarter of a man I appear just.
Yeah, that's amazing. I said, this man is very zen, very zen. All right, so if we go back, we'll pick it up right again. No problem. It's all...
I don't mind all that stuff being in there. I don't, whatever. But so half-life, so brand stuff. So then one of the things I learned as a psychologist is that action changes attitude faster than attitude changes action.
Okay.
So if I get you to interact with me, if I get you, there's a whole lot of, you'll hear about the IKEA effect, the endowment effect, the effort paradox, the Benjamin Franklin effect. All of these things basically say, if you take a step toward me and interact with me in some way, you're going to remember me more. So if I do something that actually gets you involved, gets you to co-create something, gets you to build the brand you want or whatever, or even go to a concert and make something, or just have a really cool interactive experience, for example, that experience might stay in my head for years and years and years, and I might not need to top it up nearly as much. So my big default in marketing just getting back to your question, I know this is a long answer, but getting back to your question, my default is trying to get people involved with communications, not just pushing it on them. And advertising grew up in a broadcast landscape where you push stuff at people. And most of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute has grown up with those kind of case studies. They don't have as much language around interactivity and the power of that kind of stuff. And most of the work I do involves people having some form of collective experience.
So, Adam, when you're talking about these types of engagement with consumers, to me, this is larger than advertising. We're talking about brand experience, or we're talking about customer experience. And just to drive it home for the listeners, the IKEA effect that you're talking about, in my mind, and tell me if I've got this right, is they make you walk a mile through the store, and then you buy the product and you got to build it at home. You're experiencing the brand in a very tactile way because you're building the product that you get from them. Is that what you mean by that?
So the whole concept, the broader concept's the effort paradox. The more effort you put into something, the more you value it. Carry a baby around for 9 months, pop it out. You're going to love that thing no matter what it is. Took a lot of effort. After 18 years, you're going to love it even more because of all the sunk costs.
Sure.
The IKEA effect is basically Professor Michael Norton, Harvard Business School, got people to build a bookcase versus given a bookcase, then ask them, he said at the end of the experiment, I'm going to buy them back off you. The people who have built the bookcases charge about a 30% premium to sell the bookcase back. So you value it more for having built it. May have got a few of the details slightly wrong there, but that's the effect. The walking through the maze of the IKEA thing, the driving out to IKEA, that's all part of the effort paradox. That Michael didn't study that bit. He just studied the co-creation bit of the actual building the bookcase. But I like to talk about IKEA being the least customer-centric brand in the world because there's nothing about that that's customer-centric. It's all about IKEA making me, the consumer, put effort into that brand. I think one of IKEA's official values is you do what your bit, we'll do ours to help keep costs down. So I think that's how they talk about it internally, which I like. I really admire IKEA, and I admire this is all documented in my second book, Stop Listening to the Customer, Try Hearing Your Brand Instead, which is kind of about this whole thing about have a strong vision and then work out, how to get people to buy into that vision and help build it with you.
I think the effort paradox, IKEA effect, co-creation, these are fascinating areas. And you say this whole body of evidence that if someone puts effort into the creation of product, they're going to value it more. But then you've got this other body of experiments from people like Daniel Kahneman or Todd Rogers, where they say, look, if you do one thing from behavioral science, it's make it easy. That often a little bits of friction will put people off engaging. So how do you kind of marry these two ideas together?
Those two things aren't counterintuitive, right? So put them together. What you've got is make it easy for people to get involved. So, and they will. So there's an Australian beer brand, just about our biggest beer brand in Australia is called Forex, and it's sold internationally as well. It's a good big beer brand, but it's the pride of Queensland is written on the side of the thing. So it's the biggest selling beer in Queensland by a long way, one of the biggest selling beers in Australia. In Australia, we have a thing called State of Origin, Queensland versus New South Wales, in rugby league, and Queensland has been a sponsor of the Forex, been a sponsor of the Queensland Maroons for many years. They've got Forex written on the logo. One year we decided to change the logo Forex and make it the postcode of where that player was from. And all the postcodes start with a 4, so it was 4123 or 4844 instead of Forex. And that got a lot of publicity, and it went nuts. Then the next year we thought, how do we get everyone involved in this? So we just put numbers on all the Forex cans, and we got people to show their support for their town or where they were from at the same time as supporting the Maroons when they went and played State of Origin. So people would say, come on, 4123, or, the proudly 4144. and they put the floors. They either use the cans to show their postcode, or they wrote the letters in red on hay bales or on shop fronts or whatever it was. So from taking the logo here on the player's uniform, changing that out, that was cool. But what really made it big and what makes it now a massive thing, and it's the beer brands fastest growing in Queensland. It's been very, very successful, won effectiveness awards and so on, is the collective ability to get everybody to get involved. And my camera is going nuts as my hands go a bit nuts, isn't it? But that's all right. That'll just be kind of fun.
It's all part of the experience. It's all good.
That's right. It is. It is all part of the experience. Just as an aside, one of the fun things we do at Thinkerbell is we make everybody create their own brand positioning, and we do it by getting you have to have a positive feature about yourself and a negative feature about yourself, and you chuck them together, and that's your brand positioning. Mine is enigmatic irritation. So kind of interesting, but kind of irritating. And I think this whole camera thing is a pretty good example of enigmatic irritation.
I love that. Because and that's that idea of admitting a flaw. I know that's something you've talked about before as being not just something you can use amongst staff, but being a really powerful way of boosting the appeal of brands. Is that something you could talk about?
Sorry, Richard, can you repeat the question?
Oh, I was saying I love the idea of getting the staff to talk about not just their positives, but also their flaws. Now, you've talked before about how brands have adopted that tactic. And I think it's an interesting one maybe to discuss because in some of the earlier examples, we were talking about using behavioural science to kind of sweat the small stuff, positioning the spoon in the soup the right way, or using social proof to nudge people to buy. But you've talked about examples where admitting a flaw has led to huge impacts for advertisers.
So surely you guys have spoken about this on this pod previously, I'm sure. Like this is the you're asking me to talk about the pratfall effect.
Correct.
Yeah, which is something I've spoken a lot about in the past, and basically it says if people perceive you as being competent in something and you show some form of fallibility or you fuck up in some way, they'll perceive you as being even more competent after you've done that. So maybe this example with the camera, if people believe Michael Aaron's introduction about me as being, I knew what I was talking about.
This make you more likable.
And weirdly, this camera thing is actually making people think I'm even more competent. But if you thought I was a dick when I was being introduced, then I'm doubling down on that. I really am.
Things are spiraled out of control. Yeah.
I really am a dickhead who doesn't know what he's talking about. So it all depends on that introduction, Michael Aaron. So, but it's fascinating, right? So there's a behavioral economist called Bubba Shiv who's studied this a lot and talked about blemishing and purposely putting blemishes into brands so it allows the consumer in. Again, I look at all of this holistically as the effort paradox, which is my favorite macro thing I know, because I now need, you've let me in as a flaw. I've let you into my world that I can't get my camera right, and maybe that endears me. That's a bit of a stretch, I know, but and then if brands show a blemish, it allows them in. And the reason why I love it so much in marketing is because it's a new thought. Because brands previously used to have to be glossy and shiny and so forth, whereas every other industry knew that flaws or fallibilities are what engages. So the entertainment industry has known that obviously for years. Editors know that if it bleeds, it leads. And so lots and lots of other industries know about being fallible and putting flaws into increase attractiveness. Marketers have historically thought we have to present a more polished image of the world.
And when you say entertainers know this, what do you mean by that? That stories about stars having problems that make them more appealing? Is that the kind of angle?
Yeah, but I think even just on the concept of somebody like Batman or somebody, having a flawed protagonist or, you know, that, there's no superhero. Superman used to be kind of perfect and wasn't as popular as, or maybe it's a personal preference, but wasn't as interesting as Batman, who was a fundamentally flawed character. And I think it all comes back to, and then cross-culturally, we've known this for years. So wabi-sabi, that is that kind of Japanese thought of beauty and imperfection. There's that Chinese kind of concept of yin and yang, of two opposing forces coming together. There's Jungian psychology, which is all about embracing your shadow. So all of these kind of thoughts are basically saying, to have authenticity, you have to have your blemishes, you have to show your cracks and all.
And you said advertisers have come to this quite late, but are there any examples that spring to mind of someone that you think has really nailed this as an idea?
The two examples that spring to mind, or there's loads, but the KFC, FKC or whatever, we're sorry, was kind of interesting. So just using their own brand tone and saying, fuck, we're sorry, but using the letters. There's Monteith's apple cider, which I like, which it was a brand in the UK, in New Zealand, and they put twig packaging. They put twigs in the cartons of cider. And so people were complaining about the twigs they got in the cartons of cider, saying, what's this twig doing in here? And then they allowed them to say, oh, sorry about that. It was too close to the trees or whatever. And it just made it feel fresher by having these little bits of imperfection in there.
The apple cider one is particularly meaningful because it doubles down on a brand point they want to emphasize, which is the idea that it was made from real apples. Why else would there be twigs in the box? I mean, so a imperfection that you can highlight that reinforces something you want, a positive brand perception, feels a little bit like a double whammy. If you can, is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, we've just done something recently, like in the last month or two, for a brand called V, which is the biggest energy drink in Australia. So, they've just launched a brand called V Refresh. And so V Refresh is, it's a refreshing form of V. We launched it by having an ice sculpture with V's stuck in the ice sculpture. And as the ice sculpture melted, you could take one.
I really hope you said V's, not B's. Otherwise, this was the cruelest stunt ever.
V's, yeah. Or else I'd be an idiot. But one guy went up to the ice sculpture and licked it and got his tongue curled on the ice sculpture. And he was stuck there for a couple of hours. And we publicized that. And then we had a response, which was from V officially saying, look, in all of our years, we never thought we'd have to say this, but please don't lick ice sculptures in public. It's dangerous. Try V Refresh instead. That quote got publicized everywhere, as did the imagery of a man with his tongue stuck to the ice sculpture. I'm not going to say whether that was all completely fabricated or not. It's up to you to work. But again, that kind of bit of mayhem or bit of confusion, Michael Aaron, to your point, it allowed us to get the story of V Refresh being a refreshing form of V out there through creating some kind of accident. That's just a pretty topical example. Maybe not the best or cleanest example, but it's something we've done.
Yeah. No, I think it just gets to the point that advertising is a weak force, as you said earlier, and any way you can make a more meaningful connection, either through surprise or, in this instance, engagement with a consumer that then had this outcome, makes it more memorable, makes it cut through in a more meaningful way to the people that are hearing about it.
Yeah, I think people listen to people more than they listen to brands. So I think if you can get people to do the talking for you and think of the consumer as the departure point of the story, not the end point of the story, then you're going to get stuff that flows through. So the V example, the Forex example, and a lot of our work is either getting journalists writing about stuff, passing the message on, or getting people to get involved and peer-to-peer kind of stuff as well.
Makes a lot of sense.
You mentioned earlier with the pratfall effect, the need to have a degree of status to fully harness the idea. How does a brand know if it's got that status where we're admitting a blemish or a flaw is going to work positively rather than backfire?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I think you definitely know when you've got it, right? So if you've got for years and years, like the Monty cider thing, Monty cider is a big kind of a well-established, strong brand. So you know when you've got it, but there might be emerging brands that haven't had their proposition fully established yet, that it could be very, very risky to do that. Some of the work we do a lot of work with Vegemite as well, which is a very famous brand where we get people to kind of, apply to be in the ads. If we ever do anything on Vegemite, everyone just goes nuts about it. We look like we know what we're doing because everyone gets involved. But that's just the strength of the pre-existing brand proposition that everyone wants to get involved. So it's much, much easier when you've got a strong brand proposition. And it's kind of an interesting point to remember because if we just, and with the B thing as well, that would have been ridiculous if that wasn't a very well-known brand. People wouldn't have written about it or spoken about it. So you do need to absolutely get your fundamentals right about what your brand stands for and know how your brand is going to communicate and build itself in the world. Sometimes that gets forgotten. Another example I like, which we've worked on recently, is Tui's New, or Tui's just, it's another very popular beer brand in Australia. And they used to have a song which went, I feel like a Tui's, I feel like a Tui's, I feel like a Tui's or two. That's the only time I ever do that. And
You're good. It's all good.
Looks like I've had a Tui's or two.
Yeah.
But about 20 years ago, 20 years ago maybe, they stopped using that song. We reignited the song in advertising. We did it to such a degree, the local football team has started singing the song at the end of football matches. We've got people we're now doing a music tour where the band will sing the song with the crowd at the end of the tour. And we're just bringing back these latent memory structures for this song, getting people again to sing along with it. If you're going to sing I Feel Like a Tui's, you're certainly going to buy one. And so, anyway, that's another example.
Yeah, it's a lovely example. And returning to a point you made right before we talked about that example, in your second book, you talk about how it's easy to get lost with all the insights about consumers that you forget about your brand. I think our listeners would be very interested just to hear your key insight about this. If you could talk a little bit about, yes, knowing what the consumer wants and needs is interesting, but is really more interesting for the category. And having a strong brand strategy is more important for differentiation and to improve your sales.
Yeah, thanks for that setup. You're exactly right. So listening to the customer is hard. So understanding what the customer wants is hard. Knowing what your brand stands for is probably easier, but it's a forgotten skill set. So people are spending so much time, there's so much data available on what customers want. We kind of go, oh, let's do that and let's understand all of that kind of stuff rather than understand what we stand for. Unfortunately, most of the things we understand about the customer are at a category level because no category needs your brand. They need the category. So we don't need another soft drink. We don't need another car. We need the category. When the category need occurs, we'll go, oh, okay, we'll buy that car over that car. So the more we understand the customer and the customer needs, really the more we're understanding the category. The more we're understanding the category, the more risk of homogenization because we'll appeal to the category needs, we'll appeal to the category entry points and so forth. So long-established categories all tend to have this homogenizing effect where everything becomes the same. So all the banks become the same, just separated by colors. All the cars become the same. You see all luxury good items become the same. And all they've got is distinctiveness, how they look versus what they stand for as being different. And there's no real differentiation because they homogenize. The alternative to that is being really, really clear what your brand stands for and focus on that, I'd say, over the needs of what the customer says they want. And so a good example of that is IKEA, utilitarian Swedish design that we're going to make people put a bit of effort into to enjoy. No market research group in the world is going to say, I want to walk around your maze-like store for years until I buy something. Very few of them are going to say, I want to assemble it myself and carry it home rather than have somebody do that for me. They are resisting so much customer insight to stay there. The other one I love talking about is Apple, equally as non-consumer centric, with kind of weird payment systems. You don't quite know what you're paying for. It's extreme inbuilt obsolescence, cords and wires going everywhere. I'm just looking around my desk at the moment, which is a mess of, Apple cords connecting from one thing to the other. None of that is customer centric, but it's all kind of Apple understanding their business and the business that they're in, charming us with beautiful looking product, and then working out how to monetize that really effectively. And so my insight for the book came from, I do a lot of public speaking, and everyone says, oh, we're customer obsessed. And I started to think, hey, if you really were customer obsessed, would this business be here in the first place, or would he just pack up and go home? Because maybe the customer doesn't need your brand or need your product. And if you were just delivering purely on the needs of the customer, I don't know if you'd have a business. And so it kind of feels like you need to prioritize what you stand for, what you're offering to the world, get really, really clear about that, and then draw the customer in, rather than prioritizing the other thing, which can lead to homogenization and lack of value.
I think it's a exciting thing for for all marketers to hear, not just younger marketers. I think all marketers want to stand for something, and I think almost all marketers want their brand and their product to meet a unique need. But under the pressure of meeting the consumer desires, it does lead to this homogenization that you're talking about being very careful about and being very thoughtful about. So I think finding that tension point and finding where your brand can stand out through strong brand strategy feels like a big opportunity.
Yeah, I think so. And the way I look at it is all those insights might be helpful, but they might be a threat. And they might be decreasing value if you listen to them. So, and they might throw you off course. But they might be valuable. So just don't take them as, down from the mountain or whatever the biblical expression is.
Well, this is great. Adam, this has been a very interesting discussion, and we've covered a lot of very exciting topics. Like we always do, we're going to take the key ideas from today's episode and drop them into the show notes with links for our listeners to hear more. Before we bring the conversation to a close, we always like to ask our guests something that you're reading, something that you're watching that has caught your attention, something that it can be related to consumer psychology and brand building or not. But what's Adam Ferrier obsessed with right now?
Right now, I'm obsessed with Irvin Yalom's latest book, From the Heart, The Stories from the Here and Now. It is amazing. If you don't know who Irvin Yalom is, everyone should go and read him. He's a psychiatrist. He wrote Love's Execution of Avatars of Psychotherapy, Existential Psychotherapy, The Dynamics of Group Psychotherapy. He's amazing. And Lying on the Couch was a novel. His latest, he's 93 and he's got dementia and he's dying. And he says, I can no longer form long-term relationships with my clients, so I'm only going to see them for an hour. And then I'm going to help that client as much as I can in an hour, and then I'm never going to see them again. And so he's writing stories about every person he sees and how he tries to help them in an hour. How he tries to help them in an hour is bring the conversation into the here and now. So right now, you're seeing me, the dickhead, with his fucking camera. You're seeing Richard being very erudite and jumping in with, really interesting kind of well-researched things. You see Michael Aaron kind of, being the hustler, and and so on. And this is our dynamic. This is how you this is how the three of us get by all the time. This is us. And so the more we can dissect what's going on in this moment and be honest about it, then anyway, that's what he's about. And it's really, really good. Read the book.
That is one, thank you for the analysis. And two, really it's great. We're going to drop the book into the show notes, and as we have people read it and we hear about it, Adam, we'll share back what we've heard people say.
Good stuff.
Thank you for joining us today. For all of our listeners at home, you can find the full show notes and a transcript of today's conversation at theconsumerbehaviorlab.com. Until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
Thanks for being with us, Adam.
God bless. Good on you guys.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method One. Recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in America for the third year in a row, featured on Inc.'s 5,000 list. Method One is a proudly independent creative and media agency grounded in behavioral science. They exist to make brands irresistible, helping people discover products, services, and experiences that bring moments of joy to their lives. As behavior change experts, Method One creates emotional connections that drive true brand value for their clients, focusing primarily with indulgence brands in the CPG space. Find out more at methodone.com.